Got it. Well, as you know, we passed the deadline for comments for Oregon's call area, which was the 28th of June, and did a lot of Ocean got their comments in. We distributed them to all of our electeds, and a lot of folks have just been going through the register and reading the comments. Nothing particularly surprising there. More of what we've been hearing. Unfortunately, the dialogue that came out of the listening sessions that were out on the coast that I can personally speak from, and I know Bill Gorham went to a session down south, were pretty hostile to anyone who had anything constructive to say about offshore wind. And I have been sharing that information with specific folks. Me personally, I was insulted, attacked, and the tribal security asked if they should come in because things were getting so heated after I tried to shake hands with members of the fishing leadership. They did the same thing to Representative Brock Smith, called him ignorant, literally like tapped him in the chest, leaning in really hard. And as a result, the next 5 meetings were largely facilitated by the fishing industry, which is not to say that any of the concerns that were expressed there are unsubstantiated, but it is to say that it was very one-sided, and many of the statements that were made repeatedly aren't totally based in fact, but unfortunately were picked up by Wyden and DeFazio without checking in with any of their agency staff or outreach to those of others of us that have been working on this for quite some time. So a lot of disappointment there. Fortunately, Blumauer and Bonamici also provided some comments. I'm meeting with Wyden's office tomorrow afternoon to speak more to them. But in general, on a federal level, the agencies are doing everything that they can to be responsive. But also, I was just on the line with U.S. Department of Energy about this topic. There's a broad understanding of the need for the resources. I was just down in California for 2 weeks. I had 5 different days that the little communities that I was in were completely without power. And in the case of the Sierra foothills, it was a 50-mile radius without access to any fuels as well. So at the large federal agency and state agency, our Department of Energy, there's a very deep and intimate understanding of the need for this process to continue to stay on track. And the need to respond to the concerns that there has not been enough of or the right type of engagement with stakeholders, primarily from the fishing community. On the environmental side, the concern about programmatic EISs, we're really working to try and get the example of what the outcome and the work product of a programmatic EIS looks like, particularly in the offshore wind space, and get that in front of those who are asking for this, because it doesn't answer their questions, and it really doesn't get to what it is that are the concerns. Ocean's environmental group, the preliminary cumulative effects assessment has been widely circulated. BOEM's very interested in it, but is kind of wondering if even that will address what the stated concerns are. So they're simultaneously looking at progressive, forward-thinking, advanced, and more expansive assessment they can do on the Pacific coast with Morrow, Humboldt, and Brookings and Coos, whether they call it a programmatic cumulative effects assessment or otherwise. And on the fishing side, they have been hosting a series of meetings with fishing industry members. East Coast, the Gulf, and Pacific was just last week. I think that was Thursday or Friday, with their draft engagement, which is just looking at what have they learned from their East Coast experience, how have they been engaging with the fishing community, what have they heard back that the fishing community doesn't like that, how can they lean in and be more effective in this approach. And they also are, so they're receiving comments on that from the fishing community. I was on that call Friday, and it's Heather Mann, and you've got there's three voices that keep showing up, and that was just a listening session for me to better understand what's going on and what's at play. But I'm very pleased to see BOEM's response that is so proactive, because in addition to their development of the draft engagement rules, the tool that they have to go along with that to embolden and put some teeth into what that engagement is and how they are responding to the concerns and priorities are their multi-factor bids. Down in California, we saw this 2.5% community benefit agreement that was included in the proposed notice of sale. That comment period closes in 2 weeks, I think. So we'll see some more on that. But basically what they did in California, which they had never done anywhere else, was they're testing the waters with this other tool. They're saying, okay, we've been working on the workforce development. We're talking about good, high-paying union jobs, and we're talking about supply chain. We know that the economic impacts to the region are much higher if there's a high local regional content there. And we already saw that in the bid provisions that they put out for the Carolinas. In California, they built on those successes around supply chain and workforce, and then added this community benefit agreement, which is a very broad term and can mean anything. And in the case of what they proposed for California, it was 2.5%. That's versus 20% for the workforce development and supply chain investments. Definitely heard on Friday that they took that as somewhat of an insult, that why 2.5% for this industry. So we may see, and that might be something that Ocean wants to pick up and investigate more. What we have been talking about is the value of taking the input that we now have for these huge call areas. We need about 20% of them in terms of square acreage or miles, square miles, about 20% of them to support our planning goal of 3 gigawatts. We now know from the offshore wind industry which sections they have nominated as points of interest. And we do know that there are catch values available for each of those blocks within the call area. So one suggestion that we've been making is to take this opportunity in the next 6 months between now and the identification of wind energy areas and overlay those high value catch areas so that we can avoid, when they make the wind energy areas, instead of just de facto going to those that industry nominated, overlay that. And that gives us some numbers to start talking about, some fisheries to understand that are going to be impacted. Take a look at the comments that NOAA provided. That's an excellent indicator of those areas, sensitive habitat, lots of whale habitat. That NOAA fishery said, yeah, you guys included these in the call area still, let's take those out. And our friends on the other side of NOAA in their marine spatial planning are there raising their hands, waiting to be invited over to the Pacific Northwest to help as well. So the facts are all there. We've been talking to the governor's office, to any of our electeds that we can get to our agency staff, and really encouraging, and the governor's office through their business and economic development, because our sustainable seafood industry is very important to us. And culturally, it's immensely important and helps define our whole coast. But to try and encourage those folks to get to the table to do that. Like, let's look at the call areas. Let's pick the path of least resistance. You still retain your rights. You can fight this until you die. And you can also right now think about where are those wind energy areas, and based on those, then we can start talking about what are the lease provisions. There can be investments in the wastewater treatment plants from the seafood processors. We know that those are very high ticket items. We know that there's pollution occurring now, and that this is a concern and something that could be met. We know that we have aging fleets, that they have aging, that in many cases, their communications are going to be undermined by the presence of these wind farms. We know that some of the fisheries aren't going to be able to fish particular gear types within those wind energy areas. What are they? Does that mean that they need to go farther? Do they need bigger tanks? Do they need bigger fleets? Those are the kinds of conversations we're trying to elevate. Labor has been, labor and economic development have been very open and receptive to our ideas, our information, and helping to think about how we navigate this going forward. No one wants to annihilate our sustainable fisheries. So even those that are very much in support of offshore wind and promoting the existing timeline that's been laid out are really sensitive to this need for protection. And I think everyone's trying to get up to speed on what the tools are that we have, understand if BOEM is to be trusted or not, and decide if they want to come to the table and engage on that timeline going forward. We do also know, it was shared with me, that Heather Mann has been approaching all of the county commissioners for any county that touches the coast. A friend of mine is a commissioner in Lane County, so he shared that with me, and requesting that they stand up resolutions that basically establish a moratorium on offshore wind development off of the coast of their counties. And that also let us know that their strategy is to wait until Department of Energy's report to legislators, which is due September 15th, although I see that the Senate Environment and Energy Committee has been scheduled for the 22nd, so plus or minus somewhere in there. They're going to use that as the pivot point to introduce their legislative concept for the state of Oregon to either establish a moratorium on offshore wind development off of the coast, or to insist that all development go into waters that are 1,300 meters or deeper, or kind of a a la carte menu that they're socializing over the summer to figure out how they want to go. Waiting until a programmatic EIS is completed for the Pacific. Robert Westerman and I, and it was because of Robert's invitation and suggestion, will be participating in a clean energy summit next week with labor in Portland. And we continue, I have a follow-up meeting with Chaz Jones. Recall that ATNI, Affiliated Tribes of Northwest Indians, is trying to find some match funding so that they can hold a clean energy summit in October. So I've been reaching out to members of industry as well as other organizations that we work with, like Renewable Hydrogen Alliance and Renewable Northwest, and then just straight up renewable energy developers to see if they'd be interested in investing there. We did hear very clearly from the tribes that they want to meet on their turf, on their terms, and along their timeline. So in so much as there's interest in standing that up, that seems like a good fit. And then one other piece is the Twin Cities application for renewable hydrogen. We were talking to the Port of Cromarty Firth in Scotland, which is a big industrialized port. We have shifted gears to Orkney, to the Orkney Islands. The Orkney Islands are immediately north of there. They have very similar population and demographics to Curry County and southern Coos County. they have been integrating renewable hydrogen into their system for 15 years now, because they have the European Marine Energy Center there for wave. So they've got wave and terrestrial wind. So they're a really great fit for us, and our fingers are crossed that the Island Council of Scotland will give us the thumbs up. We have that grant application due in 3 days, and we've got all of our stuff lined up on this side. So that's looking pretty good. It's really going to be up to Scotland, but it's a very, very modest grant. It's
Yeah. Jamie had a hand up. Jamie, did you have something?
Yeah, just the name of the Scotland town again.
Orkney.
Orkney?
Orkney.
Yeah.
Got it.
It's a small group of islands. Yeah.
Right.
It's so small that when I was on a trip a couple of years ago before the pandemic, the waves were high that day and they couldn't offload the passengers from the Viking ocean boat onto the little ferry boats that were going to take us ashore. So we had to skip the Orkneys. But it's beautiful looking from a distance.
They're pretty sweet. They would be a good, and they have experience through their Marine Energy Center working with the south coast of Oregon. So they understand us a bit more.
I like that combination. I'm switching from Cromarty Firth, which was a big industrial place, as the model to strive toward the Orkneys that are continuing along in their smaller ways.
Yep, absolutely. Continuing along in their smaller waves, but boy, for them, they have that RFP for 25 gigawatts is right to the north of them, and 17 gigawatts has been identified for electrolysis. So they're contemplating a planning conversion. Right now that's the North Sea. It's all oil and gas. And they haven't been using any of it. So now they're thinking about this conversion of taking their advanced understanding of renewable hydrogen, using that electrolysis, and becoming a very big player in the energy markets of the North Sea, which does have some similarities to the contemplation of the Port of Coos Bay becoming a renewable hydrogen or a renewable ammonia exporter. So it'd be good to listen in on their conversations and see how that goes, because that's a giant leap for them as well.
Shannon, I was telling the others before you got on about there's an article in the New York Times today about the hassle on the northeast coast of Spain, where they have plans to put in floating offshore wind, but the local communities are really upset because it will disturb the view, the tourism. There's one fishing boat left in the town, and he's upset that the fishing might be disturbed. And the article then goes on to point out other places where people are upset about having the offshore wind, the floating.
Yeah.
It'd be good to have. I just want to call it to your attention.
Thank you.
That article.
Let's see. There was Joe Lieberman of the Audubon Society recommended that he and I join a podcast. We're going to have an hour-long conversation that will be hosted by, who the heck was that? It was someone. It's not Coast Forest Watch. It's Coast Range Association. So Michael Gaskill is putting that together. So sometime in the next 2 weeks, Joe and I will be having a facilitated conversation just about the opportunities and concerns about Oregon's offshore wind. Just lots of interviews, podcasts, and conversations going on over this summer. And to be sure, there will be legislative action in September. So.
Did you mean Joe Liebezeit?
Liebezeit, yes. What did I say?
Lieberman. I get it mixed up too. When is this podcast?
We're trying to schedule it in the next 2 weeks. We're doodling right now. And as soon as we get it scheduled, I'll let you know.
Shannon, have there been any conversations with Wyden and DeFazio directly after they came out with their comments in support of the fisherman's point of view?
Yeah, well, DeFazio's office has been rather calcitrant. Wyden's office, I'm actually meeting with them tomorrow. Robert, I don't know if you have any. I know that Blue Green was meeting with them. I don't know if IBW.
We have IBW met with Wyden, and Blue Green is as well. We met with his staff and just made known to them that we want them to reach out to us before they weigh in on renewable energy projects in Oregon. But I think they've heard from a lot of different groups now about the error of their ways and sending that letter out. And I think it's elevated up to where they're going to pay a lot more attention in the future going forward. It did identify that we need to do a better job in putting offshore wind on our legislators, both federal and state, on their radars. In my opinion, I think the fishermen caught us a little bit in a vacuum where there was the only voice that was being heard, and that's caused the reaction that it did. But we did have a very nice meeting with Senator Wyden's staff. Not so well with Blue Green and the governor's office. We got delayed there, but it does appear that the governor's office is a little bit more ambivalent. They suggested we talk to the next governor about offshore wind. So a little bit disappointed in Kate Brown and her staff there on this issue. And then just one last thing. I have been talking with David Gomberg on a number of issues. Offshore wind is one of them. I am scheduled to meet with Heather Mann 10 a.m. on Thursday for a cup of coffee to have a discussion about the fishermen and labor. So it will be not going there to negotiate with the fishermen on anybody's behalf. It's just to deliver a message that labor is aware of their concerns and that we will work to mitigate any impacts that fishermen face, but that we are pushing forward in support of offshore wind. And after hearing the stories of how it went at the casino, I'm going to bring my boxing gloves just in case. I could take a punch, but that's it.
Wear your headgear too.
Anyone have anything else or? One more piece. I just saw that pop up on my calendar. Their DLCD has, so as for, yeah, we've got a lame duck governor. We've got a very contentious race that the entire nation is watching. One of my theories about DeFazio is that it was just as a really general blanket statement. We've seen that the National Republican Party has really been targeting, and quite successfully, the more rural parts of the nation. And this is a great opportunity. On the face of it, Oregon's coastal communities saying they don't want this. BOEM, the big federal agency, is pushing in on this and is going to tell the coastal communities what to do and how to do it. I think that it was potentially a play on the part of the National Democratic Party, and DeFazio is on his way out, and he's a strong leader to lean in and say, no, we're really leaning in heavily on behalf of our coastal rural communities and the fishing interests there. So it's just a concept that I had when I was scratching my head. Like, why did you not reach out and talk to any of us? I literally just saw you 2 months ago. So this is going to be a wild ride, not just for offshore wind, but for so many topics that are close to all of our hearts here. Overlay that, as Robert said, the importance of the need for educating our legislators. We're going to have a very fresh batch of faces and folks that are really new. Not a lot of understanding, higher level understanding of our energy systems in general, of the urgency of the resource adequacy need and where we stand, of Oregon's current position as an importer of energy. So in a broader scale, I personally am suggesting and recommending to those interested in educating those that there be two priorities for this legislative session. One is a state energy strategy. We have a Department of Energy. They do a biennial energy report. They have not, they've been tasked nor resourced with actually talking about, okay, how could Oregon meet its energy goals or participate in the energy markets of its neighbors? So that has a lot of traction. Renewable Northwest has picked that up as a primary piece of legislation. So hopefully we'll be continuing to engage in that conversation and what that looks like.
And Shannon froze.
Right.
That's important because even if it,
And then you have to repeat what you said.
You
can you
froze
hear
up.
me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
A legislative concept around a state energy strategy will do a couple of things. It will bring all of our new legislators, at least those that are serving on the environment and energy committees of the chamber, up to speed with our lack of a strategy and what the current status and state of play is with respect to our energy security and resources down the line. The other concept that we've been talking to folks about that is also not specific to offshore wind is a memorandum of understanding between the state of Oregon, Washington, and California to collaborate around the implementation of our clean energy strategies. We need over 300 gigawatts of new renewables in the WEC. That's a lot. So even if we can figure out how to navigate the siting of those, both terrestrial wind, fish-friendly hydro, terrestrial solar, offshore wind, renewable hydrogen, even if we can navigate the logistics of all of that siting, who's going to build it? Where do the supplies come from? Where is the transmission infrastructure? It behooves all players, that the communities, the labor, the industry, everyone, if we can start to align and collaborate in that space. So far, I've only been hearing thumbs up, and I was very pleased to get the thumbs up from a group. Poet has been tabling forward, which is with collaboration and financial support from Bonneville Environmental Foundation. We have representatives from every one of the private and public utilities in Oregon, Washington, and Idaho Power also has been showing up to talk to them specifically about offshore wind in the Pacific Northwest. We heard from Seattle and Light that they are hoping to include Oregon's offshore wind in their 2024 clean energy plan. We heard from PGE right up in Portland that we're going to show up in their IRPs and requests for proposals as soon as 2023. When I dropped that notion of a tri-state MOU, they were very much in support of it. That's huge. The IOUs carry a big stick. if they're supportive and labor is supportive of a concept, then something might actually have some legs. But I have not been encouraging anyone who's been suggesting that Oregon should try and run legislation that mandates construction of offshore wind of a certain amount by a certain date. It seems to me that that would throw more fuel onto the fire. But
Shannon?
yeah.
it may have been stated in it when you froze up, but you said you had two suggestions for the next legislature, and one was the state energy strategy, and the second was
Is it
within
Tri-state MOU. a
Tri-state,
three-state, yeah, memorandum of understanding for the critical agencies and stakeholders to
Okay.
be collaborating for how we're gonna build what, where.
Shannon, thank you for that, because I do think it needs to be done. In addition to, working on offshore wind, I'm working on electrification of the transportation sector with some training requirements for installation of EV charging stations throughout Oregon. And we have a number of, I think we've got clean truck corridor from California up to Washington. We're going to be installing some very large EV charging stations for freight trucks along the I-5 corridor, but every highway, including 101, is going to be getting some funding to install EV charging stations. What we don't know is if the grid can handle that extra load yet. And I don't know if there's been any studies on that. And another activity I've been involved in is the Resilient Energy Building Task Force at the state of Oregon on electrification of existing buildings, and whether we should focus on new construction for codes or whether we should try to address our large stock of existing buildings that were built prior to 2000 for energy retrofits. But a lot of the conversation there is about electrification as well. And once again, we don't know if our current grids can handle all the additional load. And then that begs the question is, with all the additional load, where is the electricity, where are the electrons actually going to come from? If we're simply importing electrons generated by coal, we're not really gaining anything. So we absolutely need massive amounts of renewable zero emission energy to be produced so that we can accomplish everything that we want to get done. And offshore wind just fits that bill. Even at 3 gigawatts, it's a lot of power that we currently don't have. So I concur, Shannon, and thank you for that.
Pivoting off of that electrification of the transportation sector, we are going to see renewable hydrogen in the transportation sector, and it's going to show up. It's already showing up down in California in those areas that are harder to electrify. And getting to what Robert was talking about, do we have the capacity for that immediate charge demand that the chargers require to electrify those vehicles? So the Department of Transportation completed its study on its pathway for renewable hydrogen and gave that presentation last week to Renewable Hydrogen Alliance. One of their key findings was that California, Oregon, and Washington needed to work together on an I-5 corridor for charging with electrolysis. The beauty of electrolysis, remember, is that when we have things like Oregon's offshore wind or a bunch of hydro that is overproducing at some time, electrolysis is a load that can be turned on and use those renewables when we have an abundance of them. And when things get tight, you turn off that electrolysis, but now you've got fuel cells and or renewable hydrogen that is there, and you can really balance that load. So that the tri-state idea, I think, is really ripe. I did mention that to ODOT, that we were thinking about it. They're very interested in helping us to push that. It's uncertain whether we even need legislation to do that. If we had a stable governor's office and we had that in all 3 states, arguably we would start there. But we don't. So.
Just want to say our next governor, Tina Kotek, is going to be awesome.
I like your optimism.
I think I've exhausted my update. Does anyone else have anything else that they'd like to share?
I noticed an ammonia truck on the highway on the south end of Coos Bay yesterday. Like a high compression, high pressure ammonia truck. I've never seen one of those on the road before, so I thought that was interesting. No idea where it's coming from or where it's going, but there it was. Looked pretty new. Otherwise, no. I'm ready to get back outside and enjoy this beautiful day working on some equipment. Thank you so much, Shannon and Bob, for sharing your insight and all
Take
the
care,
work you
everybody.
were doing.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Shannon. Thank you,
Thanks,
Sam.
everybody.
All right,
Yeah.
see you later. Bye.
Bye.